Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
Hey everyone, this is Laszlo Montgomery here with another China History Podcast special episode. I'm speaking to you from the famous Scripps College, part of Claremont University here, and I am with my good friend, Mr. Huang, who you possibly recall from the story from the episode on the Austro-German musician refugees in China. He is back with me with son Micah, and we are going to be discussing a brand new podcast show that's going to be coming out on July 19th, next Wednesday, on the Blood on Gold Mountain podcast feed. And the name of the show is Iron Horse Road, A Tale from Gold Mountain. And I'd like to welcome you both. We're here in Hao Huang's office here in Scripps College. So any echoes and faults on the audio, we could blame him.
That's right.
All right. Well, welcome, father and son.
Hey, well, thank you. Hi.
This is quite a thrill. They have two great musicians in front of me at the same time. Let me start with how this all came about. What is this, Micah?
Sure. Well, thanks, Laszlo, for having us. And we're just thrilled to talk to you and learn some history in terms of filling in the blanks in our story about these Chinese railroad workers in California. This episode on the Blood on Gold Mountain feed, Iron Horse Road, A Tale from Gold Mountain, is a part travelogue, part historical research chronicle about the lost or neglected history of what these people from South China experienced when they were kind of imported to California to construct the critical and critically difficult western leg of the Transcontinental Railroad. This project is all about history, and it's all about kind of learning what happened to the greatest extent that we can, and it is kind of setting us up for a future project in which we kind of go into detail, Blood on Gold Mountain style, telling the story of Yo Hing, who was one of the principals in the Blood on Gold Mountain drama in his former life as a railroad contractor. So that's the overall situation here.
And also as musicians, are you going to be including some musical element to this podcast, or are you just going to do this CHP style, just boring with no audio?
Well, it's there's nothing to do with like audio and history, and in our opinion, Chinese history is boring, speaking or singing or what have you. But I couldn't resist the temptation to include not only a little bit of music, not quite as in depth as our Blood on Gold Mountain listeners might be used to in terms of score, but there's definitely some music, and there's also some singing because the John Henry song of American folklore is so strangely relevant to the story that we dug up there in the Sierras. I couldn't resist putting a little tiny bit of reference to that in there. So there's a musical element, but it kind of is kind of riding shotgun with history in the driver's seat for this special episode.
So you two took a father-son sojourn through the high Sierras, and from that experience, this project was born. Tell me about traveling through the high Sierras.
It was an incredible trip. It really brought to sort of material experience the vast kind of variety of diversity of environments in California, because we went from the oasis of Claremont through the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains, through the dusty Central Valley, up into the low Sierras and then up into the high Sierras. And we went from, Highland Meadows farms to the cut. What was it called again? That
Bloomer's Cut.
yeah, in
Auburn.
yeah, California, and then all the way to Donner Pass, which
Oh, wow.
everyone knows of. And even though it was late May, right? It was late May when we went there. There were at least 15, sometimes 20 feet of snow up there. It was unbelievable. And it had been a week of 60-plus degree weather, so who knows how much snow there was originally, and it was just overwhelming. It is, Micah mentioned earlier, it was like being in Lord of the Rings. I mean, the High Sierras are so majestic, so overwhelmingly just magnificent, really. And we were not only there, but we're contemplating the work of Chinese railroad workers shaping these mountains, cutting 1,600 feet through the granite of a mountain. And that was unbelievable. So, yeah, I'll just say it again, it was to see the work of these Chinese railroad workers who had chiseled and blasted and dug their way through the centers of granite mountains. In one of those tunnels, it was a summit tunnel, it was over 1,600 feet long. That's 5 football fields longer than the 5 football fields, and it was through one mountain by hand. They just burrowed their way through it. It was unbelievable.
Some of your fellow Hakka brethren were famous as demolition experts. Were any Hakkas involved in this construction?
Well, as your listeners know, Hakka are very good at breaking things. So,
as any Cantonese person will tell you.
That's what any person will say. But the thing is that even for Hakka, I think those mountains might have been a bit of a challenge, don't you think, Micah?
They were enough of a challenge for us to get around in a car with plenty of infrastructure. So, I mean, yeah, you'd have to be a real demolition expert. That's actually there is an anecdote from the construction, which I don't know whether it's relevant to the Hakka in particular, but it is definitely relevant to demolition, which is that in order to make the Chinese miners work faster, they brought in laborers. They brought in a team of Cornish miners who were demolition experts, and they had them compete as to how much rock they could remove on a week-by-week basis. And the Chinese laborers, even though they were not demolition experts when they started, they must have become demolition experts as they went along, because they actually ended up removing more material than the experienced Cornish miners. And I think that was a very, very clever move by the railroad company in terms of kind of pitting. It's like if they had figured out how to pit different people from the Chinese population against each other in that way, maybe they would have completed the work even faster, because there's nothing like kind of good old-fashioned chauvinism to motivate people to destroy things. So,
yeah, I mentioned in that Chingehi episode, the railroads, they often pitted the Chinese against the Irish and other German and other European laborers to squeeze them on their wages. It's a great method. I'm sure it worked, but it caused a lot of hard feelings, and a lot of people were killed.
Right. And it may have contributed, those hard feelings may have contributed in some way to the exclusion movement later.
No, it was a massive contributing factor.
Right.
That was the whole thing that got it going. Was they didn't like wages being depressed by the Chinese, who were happy with these wages. And
you're so right. But it was very strategic, I'd say, because remember, Micah and I read at first they were worried, are the Chinese laborers going to be strong enough? Are they doing this and that? And then in the end, not only they were strong, they were better. They even said they're better workers, they're more reliable, they're cheaper. They were very much, they were so, what would you call it, convinced of Chinese workers that they brought almost 20,000 people over eventually.
Yeah.
And one of them said, well, we shouldn't be surprised, even though he had been on the side of saying, oh, we don't know whether these people can handle it. It's too hard work, but he said, well, we shouldn't be surprised because after all, they built the greatest wall, and what's this? Does it compare to what they built?
Yeah,
the
Great Wall, Grand Canal, Dujiangyan, all these great engineering marvels from antiquity. I'm sure the railroad barons and supervisors supervising all the laborers had no idea about that. So they look at the diminutive size of these Southern Chinese and figured, I doubt they could do the work of these strapping Germans here and Irish.
Those big strapping Irish, that's what they're known for. Sorry. But, I think that the difference, though, in region between, the people who built the Great Wall and these people who were involved in the railroad is something that does come up, especially in terms of the way that they were perceived from a kind of like their appearance, like by the mostly, people of Anglo background who are kind of overseeing the railroad work is something that I think it comes up a lot. It comes up in terms of what language or languages they were probably speaking, and it comes up in terms of the food that they were eating and all that kind of stuff. But I think that one thing that I found was, the sources that I was referring to talked a lot about the Four Counties region, the Pearl River Delta region, but not with a ton of specificity. And I think that I have become very curious about the internal dynamics of that region and how the internal dynamics in the 1850s and 60s contributed to a lot of these laborers being highly, highly, highly disenfranchised to the point where doing this kind of ridiculous manual labor for questionable returns in a lot of cases was something that they were open to or vulnerable to, depending on how you look at it. And, Laszlo, I know that you're extremely knowledgeable about Chinese history broadly and about this particular
Nali. Something that drove a lot of these workers out of China was just the whole country was up in revolt. Taiping Rebellion and in southern China, and Yan Rebellion in the north. Muslim rebellions in the northwest and the southwest. That gave a lot of impetus. And the Hakkas and the Bundes were killing each other down in Guangdong. So, this gave a lot of impetus to these southern Chinese who were conveniently located right on the coast to just get up and go. And they didn't just come here. Only a small part, well, I'm not going to say a small part, but only a portion of these people escaping China, escaping the chaos and the killing and the downturn in the economy. They not only came to California, they went all over the world. They went all over Southeast Asia, of course, and seeded all of those great cities of Southeast Asia where the Chinese carved out such a great achievement. Australia, Canada. So they went all over, and that was the time, 1850s. If there was ever a time to take a break from China, that second half of the 19th century would have been the best time.
Yeah. So one thing that kind of comes up besides the thing about the Hakka and the Bunti people is the question of the Hoisan, or some people might say Toisan. So, but we hear about them. I don't really have the knowledge base to understand what the difference between those folks and Cantonese people is. I do know that both those folks and Cantonese people did end up in these railroad camps, along with Hakka people, potentially from both areas. So is there anything that you can educate us about in terms of like those two, just briefly, the dynamics?
Well, one was that the Cantonese came from the east part of the Pearl River Delta, and the Hoisan, and we're all on the west side of the Delta, and those were the two people that were most conveniently placed near the ports and where all the labor contractors were recruiting from. So just by default, those were the ones who were the first immigrants to start leaving en masse. Just like with Zheng He in the 15th century, he was always departing from Fujian. Yes. So all of those people were Hokkien people. who were the first ones to get up and go. So it's just a regional thing. That doesn't mean there were no Hokkien here, but the story of the West in terms of the Chinese experience was really
focused on
was written by the Hoisanese and the Cantonese.
I wanted to actually bring something up, and I know Micah has something to say about it. What was really interesting for us was we didn't realize the sort of liaison or contractors, the Chinese labor contractors, who played such a pivotal role. I think that a lot of people think that Chinese were simply kind of imported into California by the railroad, but I think it was more complicated than that. And I think that was something that was new for me. That was something that I learned. So, Micah, do you want to talk a little bit about what we found out?
This is where I think the story takes a bit of a dark turn for me, because in school we didn't really learn about anything Chinese, but like the general narrative was that, these people were seeking their fortune, they were like looking for a better life, and then kind of getting into the story, and especially into the story of the kind of principal contractor for the Central Pacific Railroad, who was a guy called Huang, is that this guy was pretty much he was as much human trafficker as like anything else, and the way that the contractors who were these bosses, many of whom were actually hand in glove or something with the railroad kind of bosses, they were kind of managing everything with regard to the laborers, and in fact the laborers' wages were paid to these contractors throughout the duration of the laborers' time on the line. And the contractors were not only responsible for feeding the laborers, taking care of them in whatever way that they were, deducting all the fees, so to speak, from the wages before any were paid to the laborers, but also for kind of replacing them when they were killed or when they started to become insubordinate. I think that it's something that I feel like, has one foot on either side of the line between forced or enslaved labor and free labor. And I think that it's really, really interesting that this was occurring at that exact time when slavery had just been outlawed in the United States. And so kind of finding new ways to get big projects done and maintain a massive kind of potential profit margin for some people was something that was a big thing. And the fact that what really made this possible was the complicity of these Chinese labor contractors in the exploitation of the workers really is something that I think echoes down the ages in terms of the way that immigration and work and those types of things manifest themselves, in the United States and elsewhere to this day. It definitely had a lot of food for thought with regard to that aspect.
Yeah, we saw that in Chinatown a lot with the Tongs, preying on their own fellow Chinese. The labor contractors, I discussed that again also in that Chingehi episode, because that was his main rice was labor contracting. Yeah. And when after Chinese exclusion came, and, bringing laborers into the country became next to impossible. The only way to do it was to bring them down from Canada, because Canada, although they jumped on the bandwagon too, excluding Chinese, they didn't do it immediately, and they didn't do it as harshly as the United States. They said, well, you have to pay a certain head tax or something, and then you could come in, which, is the easiest thing in the world to get around. So Chingehi's labor contracting business went from bringing in laborers direct from Hoisan into the greater Seattle area to bringing them from across the border in Canada and sneaking them in, providing all the false papers and, facilitating the illegal just to traffic in the laborers and make them accessible just like they were before. So
it's quite a story. It's quite, and I think that in the social justice circles, that I sometimes am in, human trafficking from Asia and over the land borders is still such a thing. It's funny how Like a system can be very exploitative or whatever, but if it works, if it meets a demand in the country, it keeps on manifesting itself in all sorts of different ways. So that's
People are still trying to get in.
Exactly right.
The most horrible place in the world, but people can't
Exactly right.
stop
People
themselves.
are drowning, right? They're dying to try to get in here.
guess it's a question of what they're trying to get away from. too.
Yeah, that too.
Yeah.
There was one other thing I just wanted to mention before I forget, which has to do with Leland Stanford, who represents for me part of the railroad people who built the western portion of the transcontinental rail line. And I feel he really played both sides because on the one hand, he profited enormously from the Chinese railroad workers. I mean, that's what built his incredible house that he also stuffed with Chinese servants. And that's also what gave him enough money to found Stanford University. But when he was running for governor, he campaigned on a totally anti-Chinese labor platform, saying these are depraved. This is a depraved race. We can't allow these people to come in. They're going to and it just. I think in many ways there are echoes of politicians who all still talk about immigrant labor and cheap. What cheap labor does, and yet they own companies that are profiting because the worst. The harder they make it for immigrant laborers, the less they have to pay them, and also the less they have to pay anyone else who wants to get these jobs, right? Because it's just it's a wonderful way to kind of keep a certain kind of economic control and exploitation in place by playing people off each other, which I think you touched on, Laszlo, when you were talking about how this has been a strategy, right, of playing people off each other, divide and conquer.
Depress those wages. Yeah, Leland Stanford.
Part of me sometimes wonders whether after he profited so much from this exploitative immigrant labor, whether he was just like, okay, well, I made a bunch of money, but I don't want other people to be able to make a bunch of money the same way. So, it's like, what do you call that? Defensive economics?
That's right.
I don't know, so maybe that's...
you can't get rich off those Chinese laborers the way I did.
He definitely got pretty rich, though. I mean, I feel like I might have heard of that guy before. You know what I'm saying? Like, he really made his mark.
So, Micah, you represent the next generation from the decrepit generation of your father and I.
Yes.
So it's nice to see a new generation learning about this part of U.S. history and embracing it and trying to learn more and uncover more. But what is it about these Chinese laborers who came here? What spoke to you personally about their story?
Well, I think that my generation, as the kind of young millennial, kind of Gen Z cusp, we as a block are very interested in digging up the buried aspects of American history and kind of trying to understand our own context in a different way. We're looking for fresh perspectives other than what has been kind of crammed down our throats by the public education system. And so that's kind of what started me on the path. But when I really encountered these laborers as historical figures, as people who kind of come to life when you look into their stories, it really is the kind of epicness of their journey that really captivated me, just coming from this very challenging situation and coming into something that is just out of a fairy tale in terms of the scale and the scope, the mountains, living in tent cities under snow or hauling locomotives by hand over snow-covered peaks or tunneling through the mountains. It's a fantastic story, despite, all the loss of life and all the exploitation and whatnot that went into it. Also, I just think that it's inspiring. The physical strength that these laborers deployed, I think, is something that for a lot of Asian Americans who I think, especially male Asian Americans who get a lot of assumptions that, oh, you're not going to be good at sports, or, oh, you're not going to, like this or that, to kind of look back and say, like if I'm getting into athletic stuff, or like kind of like doing stuff like that, like we're not the first Asian Americans to be interested in kind of pushing our bodies to the limit, albeit we have a much better situation than these guys did. And I think that the last thing is that the role that the work that these laborers played in the development of the United States as a country and as an economy is significant on a level that really flies in the face of narratives about Asian people being interlopers, Asian people being people who just kind of came here and profited from the blood, sweat, and tears of everybody else, which are very common in the culture. Like a historian from University of Texas, who I quote in Iron Horse Road, pointed out that it was after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad that the U.S. economy really exploded because of being able to connect Pacific and Atlantic trade at speed. So kind of for us here in California, especially, understanding that Chinese Americans, Asian Americans by extension, really do figure kind of prominently in the history of the development of this region, with all its warts, with all its kind of implications, positive and negative. But like, there is a sense in which we belong here as much as anyone else who is not from an indigenous cultural background. And I think that is very significant for me and for, I hope, other Chinese and Asian Americans of my generation.
Their anonymity of these laborers who worked in the American West, and not only them, but people in the Chinese who worked in the Chinese Labor Corps during World War I. It's just everything is spoken in such general terms. These Chinese laborers, and the story is so well known, but there's so few specifics. Maybe because of their education or because of no aspirations to be a great writer. Their stories, we didn't learn about the individual stories, and those are probably, every one is worthy of a movie. We just sort of pick them up as this one general group who just achieved this incredible story in the American West. And it's really a shame. So but it is coming out, at least to know of the general history is a beginning. And
absolutely. And it is partly, I'm going to just call it out. I'm going to say partly this kind of individual neglect, which you so, vividly point out, is because of institutionalized racism. It's them. It's just a body of them, right? But I can say I agree with Micah, even as an old guy of the previous generation. I never felt more belonging to this land than when I looked up into those mountains and thought about what these amazing people had done. And it doesn't matter they're not my relatives in a direct way.
Some of them might have been.
And some may have been, but the most important thing
one
is...
never knows, do one?
Asian... Yes.
The one playing the music around the campfire.
That's right. Well, Asian Americans have been conditioned for over centuries, right, to feel like interlopers, guests, like people who don't really belong here. And looking up at the mountains and seeing how they've been carved and burrowed and built, the China Wall, and unbelievable, it's still standing. There's still trains thundering over it.
Not the China Wall. Sorry.
Oh, not anymore?
Many of the sites are still in use, though.
Yeah,
which
many
is
of the
crazy.
sites. But the key is that it's just that kind of monumental labor. Really, it does earn people from China, from Asia, some credibility. We contributed to this country, and this country would not be what it is without the labor of many unsung, right, people.
Yeah.
And so what this is all about is trying to bring those stories to light again, so that people will know, and hopefully will feel better about themselves. In the end, I think the best antidote to racism is to learn how to feel better about yourself first, because then you don't need to target other people.
Good words. Good words to live by. I really feel that more is getting out now through podcasting and through new media and, through Hollywood. More is getting out now than ever before.
Right.
And I think the ignorance is being slowly diminished. And, it's good to see young Micah here. The next
younger
generation is, still embracing it. I get a lot of emails and whatnot from people that are in their 20s and 30s that are just listening to the China History podcast. And, people are interested, I think more interested today than ever before in American history. And I would extend that to the whole world. I think that goes outside of the United States too. And it's going in the right direction. It's going in the right direction. It's important to make sure that people know about that, because that's part of our history as well.
And thank you for continuing to do all this.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
It's our honor to be able to speak with somebody whose knowledge of history, of Chinese history, of Chinese American history is so extensive.
And has done sustained work that matters so much.
Pukantang. All right, well, I think we can wind things down now. I'd like to express my thanks to your better half for letting us use her spacious and well-appointed office to record this special episode. Micah, you're off to Harvard soon to begin a new program. And how you'll be here all summer?
Right.
All right. Have you been anywhere in your capacity as special envoy?
Well, yes, I've been to France and I've been down to the Baja a couple times. So yes, I've been traveling.
Flying the American flag or just having a good time?
No, just learning.
Oh.
It's a great way to learn.
Okay. Well, thanks, gentlemen, for coming on. This has been nice, and this is Laszlo Montgomery signing off from beautiful Claremont, California, the city of trees and PhDs. Join me next time, if you will, for another exciting episode of the China History Podcast.
1, 2, 3. Table read.
The Table Read podcast is like watching a movie with your eyes closed. Incredible production, totally immersive.
Get a behind-the-scenes look into the Hollywood process as real actors sit down and bring scripts to life in Table Read.
If you've never listened to Table Read, I say check it out.
Table Read brings you established and new amazing writers with their scripts brought to life by fantastic actors.
So check out Table Read. You never know what you might hear or who might show up.
So check out Table Read.
Come for the stories, stay for the laughs. It's unlike any other podcast. Listen and subscribe to Table Read today on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, or wherever you get your podcasts.